We ready?
Yeah.
We will call to order the Deschutes County Planning Commission for Thursday, May 23rd. Our first item of order is the approval of minutes for April 25. Everyone that was present, have we read the minutes? Do we have any discussion?
Move to approve.
All right. Second?
Second.
All righty. Any discussion?
Was I here April 25th?
I don't believe so.
Where's the last couple?
Okay. All right. So I'll abstain then. I couldn't remember.
Those who were present, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And
Aye.
Commissioner? Aye.
Aye.
All righty. Minutes approved. Do we have anyone from the public online?
Just one, but I think he's just listening in to the work session item.
Okay. All righty then. First action item, work session in preparation for a public hearing, Highway 20 mini storage text amendments.
All right. Just load my. All right. Good evening, commissioners. Nice to see you again. For the record, Nicole Mardell, Senior Planner with Deschutes County Community Development. And today is our preparation for a public hearing. It's a work session on an applicant initiated text amendment related to allowance of mini storage as a conditional use along Highway 20 under certain conditions. So just a bit of background. I think this might be new to a couple of our newer commissioners. In the past, you've probably seen text amendments that come forward that staff have produced. We've reached out to agency partners, typically done some community engagement. But there is, a process in which any member of the public, any property owner can submit their text amendment proposal along with a fee. And then we process that, review it, and bring it to the Planning Commission and the board to review. So in this case, Eastside Bend LLC submitted their application for some proposed changes to our multiple use agricultural zoning district to allow mini storage as a conditional use in very specific areas. So within 2,500 feet of a UGB and adjacent to Highway 20, and for property that's at least 10 acres in size and no greater than 35 acres in size. So this is online on the project website, but just wanted to show it here. We used our GIS to kind of analyze which properties might be eligible as of today. And it looks like there's about 3 properties that would meet all of those criteria, but wanted to note that that could change if the urban growth boundary, adjacent to Highway 20, if it were to expand, if multiple parcels were used to meet minimum parcel size, that minimum 10 acres, there could be additional ones. So mostly these 3 appear to be located on the east side of Bend. Again, if a UGB expands in the future, or if potentially multiple parcels would be used in a kind of a unique configuration, then potentially some parcels north of Bend along Highway 20, sort of on the way to Sisters, could potentially be eligible, but currently they don't meet the requirements in the draft code. Some of the background on how we currently, regulate mini storage as a use in our code. It's currently allowed in 6 zoning districts, primarily in our unincorporated communities in Terrebonne, Tumalo, and Sun River, and also in our rural commercial and rural industrial district. For all except Tumalo Industrial, these are allowed as conditional uses, but in the Tumalo Industrial District, it's allowed just subject to site plan review. But wanted to note that in each of these zones where it's allowed, there are quite a few additional regulations. So things like square footage maximums, setbacks from residential properties, design and compatibility criteria. And it appears that those were added to the code intentionally as part of periodic review to ensure that those uses in those zoning districts remained rural in nature. So that's kind of, the way that our code ensures that with these kind of additional requirements, the use wouldn't rise to the same level as, say, mini storage in a city. So that's kind of the way to keep it a little bit more rural in nature. I wanted to also note that there is some case law about mini storage and a location adjacent to an urban growth boundary. So there's some case law about Goal 14 and at what point a Goal 14 exception might be required, again, because a use might be considered urban in nature if it's so close to UGB, if say city residents are traveling into the rural county to store their RVs or boats or, personal items in that storage. So we did ask the applicant in their application materials to respond to that and provide some findings. So you'll see that in record, and just wanted to note that that might be something that you'll see in comments. We've already received one public comment in which that's been mentioned. Also wanted to note that in addition to kind of those specific criteria for mini storage in those 6 zoning districts, there's also some blanket conditional use requirements in our conditional use chapter. So these apply across all those 6 zoning districts and would also apply to this proposal as well. So it would be, a square foot max on individual units, limitations on outside storage, some landscaping, screening, setback requirements, some requirements for parking access and traffic lane configuration. And also just wanted to note that permitted as part of this conditional use criteria is an on-site caretaker residence. So if someone wanted to live, next to the mini storage facility and oversee it, there would be that allowance. So far, we've received 2 agency comments. So we received one from Bend Parks and Recreation, noting that the 3 properties that are currently potentially eligible, those are, included in their plans for a future trail. So there was a request from Bend Parks and Rec to include an additional criteria, in the proposed language to, require granting of an access easement to allow development of that trail, which would be eventually maintained and owned by Bend Parks and Rec. We also received a comment from ODOT, not expressing any concerns or not raising any questions about the text amendment, but just noting if this were approved and moved on to a development application, just kind of taking note of access because of its location along the highway. There might be some challenges with kind of highway spacing standards there. Also wanted to note, as I mentioned previously, we did receive one public comment this afternoon, just expressing concern regarding Goal 14, noting concern that this might be seen as an urban use on rural land and might not be, kind of following the orderly transition between city and rural county. So you'll see that in the record as well. But with that, just wanted to note, again, as I mentioned, this is kind of your opportunity to ask any questions of staff or the applicant. If you have any items that you would like either us or the applicant to discuss during the public hearing or to focus on, we're happy to do that as well. But really, this is just an opportunity to warm you up on this topic, give you a little bit of background. And also just wanted to note, for those who might be listening, the project website where the full record is deschutes.org/highway 20 storage, excuse me. And yes, your public hearing is on June 13th at your next meeting. So with that, I welcome any questions.
Yeah, thanks. I was looking at your comments as far as Bend Park and Rec regarding trail access or easement. And I just wonder if there were any thoughts before we got into discussion on that, on how that might be impacted by Dolan.
Yeah, I think that's
Because it seems an exact parallel to that case, which the Supreme Court wasn't friendly toward.
I think that's a great question, commissioners, just to start, and then I'll pass this over to Stephanie. So I wanted to kind of note your options since this is an applicant initiated text amendment. So you have the opportunity to review the draft language proposed by the applicant and approve or deny it. You do have the ability also to amend it or change it. So it's kind of up to you what you do with some of these comments. But I think the Bend Parks and Rec District in particular, I think, was providing this into the record and submitting that to the applicant for their review, but I haven't received a response yet from the applicant, so I can make sure they can address that during their presentation if they'd be interested in that, open to that. But in terms of your question about a nexus with Dolan, maybe Stephanie could talk about that.
Sure. Hey, everybody, Stephanie Marshall, promoted to senior assistant legal counsel, just FYI. So there's my new title. Yeah, that's a great question. And I have to admit, I'm coming in a little cold, not to the proposal, but to the comment regarding trail easements. So if there are existing easements, that's a separate that Ben Park and Recs have over the property, that would be a different animal than say requiring, if the county were to require for the text amendment, might or might not implicate Dolan.
I would have another follow-up question. Is there a reason specifically why they chose a text amendment in the MUA zone as opposed to a zone change to something that might be maybe easier and more appropriate for this type of use?
That's an excellent question, Commissioner. They didn't provide much detail on that in the application, so I think that's a great item for us to share with the applicant and ask them to discuss during their presentation at the hearing.
Do they own those 3 current lots?
Yes, the Eastside Bend LLC owns those 3 lots.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
they
according to Dial.
okay.
Yeah, it's like the I Love You Slowly in Spanish, I think owns one of them.
I think that's, another developer.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the correction. Yeah, and we can verify with the applicant just to make sure. But yeah, it looks like they at least own 2 of the 3.
And on that, I was kind of curious. I thought on the map when I was studying Dial there was a lot between the UGB and those 3 that's, to me, it looked like 10 acres, 10.4 acres. And I was wondering why that wasn't included. Because to me, it met all the other requirements, but I didn't know.
I'm gonna pull up.
Yeah, pull it up because maybe I could be totally have misread it too.
Did you see that it was zoned MUA, the other lot?
It's like, yes, it's
Was it on this map? Was
it's
it
the one between the UGB
One
and
of the lots is zoned EFU.
okay? This
was that EFU?
yeah, I believe so.
Okay, that's the difference. Okay.
Any other questions?
I guess I have another question. Is there do we know the vacancy rate on, is there a strong need for more mini storage in the county?
Another excellent question for us to share with the applicant. Again, they didn't provide much detail in the application on, their expectations for like a specific need or like a market analysis. But I think you raise a good point of just trying to understand, what type of users they expect to see, kind of where this might fit into the market. So yeah, happy to share that question with them and ask them to respond.
If the text amendment was denied, might be the zoning change that would apply there? Like if they were to try to apply for a zone change?
So I would say, because of the 6 zoning districts in which mini storage is currently allowed, 4 of them are unincorporated communities. So there's a specific boundary around the properties that are eligible. These properties wouldn't be eligible for that. But rural commercial, rural industrial are potentially 2 options in which mini storage is allowed that they could potentially rezone to. And we do have, some recent applications that were successful in rezoning to rural industrial, I believe. But would require a pretty extensive plan amendment zone change process.
Commissioner Altman?
Thank you, Chair. I actually have a number of questions. One with regard to zone change, is there a limit to how many times you can do a zone change? Because I believe that all of these properties were zoned EFU and they were rezoned to MUA. So do you only get one opportunity to do that? Or if they try to do that, could they do it again to a rural industrial?
I don't believe there's any limitation. I actually processed the MUA 10 zone changes for these back in the day when I first started at Deschutes County to MUA 10, and they're previously EFU. So they essentially rezoned due to, the soil analysis on the property not being able to be viably farmed. But I don't think that there's anything that would prevent them in our process from rezoning to another district. Peter?
And Madam Chair, if I may, Peter Gutowski, Community Development Director, the zone change criteria speaks to a change of circumstances.
Mhm.
So
Right.
to the extent that that became an option for those property owners, they would need to address that specific provision and that could afford them the ability to then justify under this hypothetical why the current zoning isn't sufficient.
May I ask another question?
Absolutely.
For the record, could you address what the outdoor storage limitations are for mini storage location?
Yes, I can. Let me pull up my staff report here. So are you, and you're speaking to our conditional use criteria?
Yes, you mentioned in your opening presentation that there are some limits on outdoor storage, and I tried to quickly read through because I feel like I remembered reading it, but I, off the top of my head, don't remember what I read. So I'm wondering if you know.
Absolutely. Here, I can pull that up. And in the meantime, feel free to ask other questions just while I'm pulling that.
Okay. My other question would be, could you do mixed use on these properties? So all of these properties are around similar sizes, 30-ish acres. The owners are developers. Presumably in the future, they would want to develop residential housing. Could you have mini storage and housing on the same lot? Or is it you just get one or the other?
That's a good question. I might call upon my tag team here on Will Groves. And just to answer your question, your previous question, so the limitation on outside storage, it notes that mini storage shall be limited to dead storage. So boats, RVs, and similar vehicles placed within designated spaces on all weather surfaced area and surrounded by a site obscuring fence at least 6 feet in height. So I think it's just preventing, I'll try to find some other examples of not alive storage, I suppose.
I was just curious if there's a limitation, presumably if you have 30 acres, you could put 1,000, RVs there for storage. And so I'm just wondering, what's the limit?
Like a percentage of a lot, something like that?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah, that's a great question. And to my knowledge, I mean, we have, like lot coverage standards in that MIOA 10 zone that might fall into that category. But I think that's a great item for us to, include in our public hearing staff report as well.
Yeah, thank you for the record, Will Groves, your planning manager, chair, commissioners. A couple questions there. Mini storage, it's interesting. Sometimes people were looking in the past to do really just RV storage. And it says that you have to have mini storage units in order to get at the RV storage. And so we've had people who built 2 mini storage units and then proceeded to have an RV storage facility. And because the lot coverage is generally limited to structures, the RVs wouldn't be seen as structures under the code. So at least as currently proposed, there wouldn't be any limit to the amount of, if you approved an RV, if you approved mini storage as proposed, there wouldn't be a reason why someone couldn't build 2 mini storage units and then cover the property solid in RVs, with the exclusion of there's landscape areas and other things like that have to be associated with it. But yeah, that's something that currently does not have significant sideboards on it in the code. The second question had to do with multiple use of the property. And there's generally speaking, and in this case, there's nothing that precludes multiple uses of the same property. So anything that's on the menu in the zoning code, you can do each of them, provided that that they're all the property suitable for each of them in turn. So particularly for things that are conditional uses like mini storage, it would be a question: if there was an existing house on the property, is this compatible with the residential use of the property? And that's come up in other cases where people look to put a conditional use on the same property as a residence. And, so visual screening, spacing, access, parking, those things would be considered for both uses combined to make sure that there wasn't some obvious incompatibility happening. But you could then, you could stack a veterinary clinic on the same property, under a conditional use of the MIOA 10. There's no reason why you can't keep putting uses on the property until such time as there's no room left for parking or building, or there's some obvious incompatibility that's coming up.
Can I keep going?
Commissioner Stockham, I see your hand raised.
Commissioner Altman, keep asking questions. I can wait.
Alrighty, keep going.
So MUA 10, if this were to be subdivided for housing, it's not minimum 10 acres. Is it?
It is
mean-
minimum 10 acres unless a cluster plan development were proposed.
Yeah, it's a little bit complicated. So
Right.
generally speaking, when you see a MUA 10, it's a 10-acre minimum. However, there are cluster and plan developments, and those are afforded density bonuses the closer you are to the city. Some either, an effective density of 1 unit per 7.5 acres or 1 unit per 5 acres. So it is possible to do those types of land divisions on these sorts of properties.
I have one more question. So talking about mixed use, if you did mini storage and residential, based on this size of these properties, how much could they be subdivided into smaller properties? Is it MUA 10 so they couldn't be divided into smaller than 10-acre parcels, or is that kind of a different?
Again, it depends on if they took advantage of the cluster and plan development. So those are available at density bonuses. So what you typically then would see is some significant portion of the property in open space with smaller lots. So, let's say that I had, let's see if the math will work out for me here. Let's say that I had 75 acres and I wanted to, the one I could create 7.5, I could grow 7, 10-acre lots. But I could come in for a cluster and get 10 clustered lots. And those would typically be between 2 and 3 acres, usually have some sort of road associated with them. And then the remainder of the property would have to be allocated to some open space. So one of the things I think where you're moving towards here is, I think that, you can look to the applicant and even ask them this question. Mini storage is frequently a holding economic opportunity as people wait to be brought into adjacent urban areas to try to capture some value without formatting the property through subdivision in a way that would preclude more high density development in the future. They haven't, I don't know that they've specifically spoken to that, and you may want to ask about it. I'm purely speculating. But, in the event that it would not be surprising if someone in this situation found themselves not brought into the UGB in a timely manner. And we've had, some concerns about this over time about the orderly development next to UGBs. That someone might put in a cluster subdivision on, a portion of the property and then, and then potentially, and I'd have to look to see I think the open space rules would preclude this. So you couldn't, in that case, likely put mini storage on the open space parcel that was left behind from a clustering effort.
Okay.
But it's worth looking into.
Those are my questions. Thank you, Chair.
And Madam Chair, I just wanted to clarify, looking at the zoning map now, that skinny strip of land that we talked about earlier, I think we said it was EFU, but it's actually UAR 10. So it's kind of this urban reserve area for City of Bend.
Commissioner Stockham?
Yeah. I was curious, did it say in the staff report now, like what the maximum capacity could be for like the number of storage units out there? Just kind of curious, like if it was like fully built out, what that could be for like, because it was saying like the square footage of what they could be, but I was just curious what it would be built out. Do you have any input on that?
Good question, Commissioner. I don't at this time. I think there was a similar question asked earlier, and I think that that's something that we could ask the applicant again as part of kind of just their overview to present some information on kind of like a highest and best use scenario potentially, like what are the maximum number of like units and RVs that could potentially be stored on this property. So I think we can share that with the applicant and ask them to address that, and then we as staff can look into that as well.
Okay.
Something that's
I'm just
likely to come up in regard to this is has to do with kind of the effective density of uses that are allowed in the rural community. And so it'll be interesting to see how this comes into play with regard to this. You saw there's a comment letter to this effect about urban uses outside of urban areas. And for our rural commercial zones or rural industrial zones have out of statute limitations on the number and types and densities of buildings and cumulative square footage allocated to uses. And so it'll be interesting to see how the applicant, to the extent that that discussion occurs as part of the hearing process, how the applicant responds to that. I haven't done any intense research into this, but it would be there may be a reasonable concern that if if it's a highly dense use that's greater than what has been previously identified as an inherently rural use in a rural commercial zone or a rural industrial zone, or the in comparison to the UUC's Terrebonne Sun River. If this use went beyond that density, that square footage, there may be statutory concerns associated with that, and I would expect the applicant to address that, and you'll likely hear testimony related to it.
Mhm. And I have one more question, if I can ask that. Who established the criteria for the proposed text amendment? Was it the applicant? Like, I was just kind of curious how the minimum 10 acres, maximum 35 acres, and then like the 2,500 feet from UGB, like, how was that established?
Yeah, good question, Commissioner. That was established by the applicant, so that was their proposal.
Mhm.
I have a question.
Mhm.
So, I assume one of our options, if we decide to recommend this with modifications, would be we could modify those criteria if we felt like we wanted to. I mean, I'm assuming that, is that a correct assumption?
I believe that's a correct assumption. I mean, similar to what you've done, and Peter will can definitely correct me if if I'm misunderstanding, but I think, similar to how you've responded to staff initiated text amendments, if you wanted to offer suggested revisions and vote on them, that would be carried on to the board, since there will be a second hearing process for this. So if you wanted to add additional criteria, additional standards, I think that would be within your purview. But
Yeah, certainly. And I was looking through the code in the rural commercial mini storage area zone. Mini storage facilities are limited to 35,000 square feet in size. So it'll be interesting to see if there's a specific proposal to follow that limit or to try and not work on that. But certainly you're our citizen involvement body. You're allowed to make recommendations from, ranging from yes to no to yes, but, and yes, and. And so, to the extent that, for example, you thought that more visual screening was appropriate, or different lot sizes or special setbacks, that's something that you could definitely recommend as part of that to the board. You'd basically say, hey, the applicant's proposal, we recommend you either, we like it, we don't, and we have some suggestions on sideboards, or we don't. Those are always options.
Yeah, I might, if I may, Madam Chair, to Commissioner Karras's comment. One thing that Will is absolutely correct. The one thing that I would underscore is to remember that this is not a staff initiated text amendment. This is an applicant initiated text amendment. So you just want to be mindful that that the applicant is the one who's of course has initiated this respectful request to take advantage of a text amendment. And so, well, I think I'm just acknowledging that you're going to want to be aware of that dynamic versus if it was staff and we're bringing forward the rural accessory dwelling units or RVs as a second, you have the ability. You're afforded that communication in a way that is very seamless to the staff-led process. Here you've got an applicant who's offering a certain proposal, and I think it'll be, we're not trying to be presumptuous here, we haven't had the hearing, but if you found that you had some reservations at some point, you need to look at what the applicant has proposed and get a sense of how they're responding to your questions and inquiries, because again, they're the one bearing this burden, unlike a legislative amendment that staff is undertaking.
I have another question. So I think something that I'm not sure about yet, but I may find like myself interested in is this proposal seems like these criteria seem very specific to me, and there's just 3 properties that meet them. And I think I'm wondering about like if the criteria were different, for instance, like it just needs to be near a highway rather than needs to be near Highway 20. Maybe all the other criteria are the same. Does that mean there's some available now on 97? Like this proposal seems kind of like a project to me. Like it seems like we're considering whether this particular project can happen, as opposed to we're considering whether the criteria for MUA and mini storage in general should be changed because of how specific these criteria are. So I guess I'm just wondering about if the criteria were less specific, would other properties be eligible? And then from there, we could consider, is this a good idea for the county in general, or is this just a good idea for this particular applicant?
I think.
I could,
I'll-
oh, you want to go
I'll
ahead?
start, then
Yeah,
I'll
please.
finish it off. So I want to take this opportunity to inform the planning commission that there is a separate proposal that you are going to be reviewing. So there's another proposal for a very similar application, except the difference is that it's along Highway 97, and there's a slight tweak to the maximum acreage. So the Highway 97 application was submitted first, but is being reviewed. We'll have the work session on June 13th at the same time you have the hearing as this. We've spoken to applicants. They want to keep these separate. They don't necessarily want to combine them into one proposal. So, I mean, like Peter was mentioning, I think we have to kind of acknowledge that these were the packages submitted by the applicants.
Is it the same applicant?
Separate applicants. So Eastside Bend LLC is this applicant for Highway 20, and Schwabe, Williamson, and Wyatt has submitted the proposal for Highway 97. I think I'm going to turn it over to Will if you wanted to talk about maybe like deliberations and, you know, I guess I want to say before I turn it over, part of what we're trying to do, because the applicants have submitted these separately, paid fees separately, and asked for the hearings to be, you know, processed separately, is we're trying to manage, you know, the records for each of these to ensure that we have, you know, an orderly process and don't run into a procedural error. But I guess maybe, Will, if you wanted to tackle the question of if it were to expand beyond the scope of the applicant's proposal for Highway 20.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just wondering can we get that information of what properties would be eligible if we decided that we wanted the highway part to be different, like any highway or Highway 97 or Highway 20?
It's something you could request.
Okay, so I would request that at the hearing, but not right now. Got it. Okay, I'll make a note.
And just to give you a little context, you know, at least in my experience, and again, I haven't talked with the applicant specifically about this, narrowing of the geographic scope of a new use is often helpful for deliberative bodies to think about the impacts clearly. You know, if you recall back to the RV concern and the significant concerns the commission had about the widespreadness of that, and you know how you might have felt differently about it if it had been limited to within 1 mile of the UGB or along, you know, in similar ways. It's easier generally for deliberative bodies to get their head around this. You know, the idea of mini storage being appropriate at potentially any property in the county, you know, that's potentially a huge question. You know, at the same time, you have to ask yourself, why is it appropriate here and not someplace else? You know, is there something special about these properties that make these, you know, more suitable? And so you know, if this sounds to you like an amazing opportunity that should be afforded equally to everyone, that's a perspective that you could carry forward to the board.
I just wanted to add in terms of a mapping request, you know, our staff who produces these maps, they're incredibly helpful, but what is helpful to them in creating them is having specific criteria. So for instance, if you were to ask, you know, I'd like a map of properties along any highway and MUA 10, that would be a very different, much more extensive mapping project than if you were to request one that's, say, you know, the same criteria plus within 5,000 feet of a UGB. So just something to keep in mind. I also just wanted to note, since there was a question about, you know, other existing zones that allow mini storage, I'm wondering if it would be helpful for the commission. This is a table that I've abbreviated for the PowerPoint, even though it's still a lot of text, but there's more detail in the staff report, but I can also include those specific sections of our code so you can read through, you know, the standards for mini storage in detail if you'd like. So I'm happy to provide that in the hearing packet.
Commissioner Hofkamp, yes.
Thank you. Just a few questions. Start off with an observation, and I can be corrected here, but I think when trail alignments are incorporated into planning documents, longstanding planning documents, it's a relatively common practice. And this is in regards to Bend Park and Rec. And I should disclose again that I'm on the board for Park and Rec. But I think it's relatively common to provide for trail easements when there are development of parcels where there are parcels where there are, again, longstanding planned trails. Anyway, I don't think that it's not like an unusual request for an agency to make, but I can be corrected there. But a question for you though, staff, please. And it's very much in line with Commissioner Karras's observation that I also had some confusion over the, it's a text amendment and yet it's really, really specific. And Will, thank you for that explanation as to why, I suppose. But in line with that, that it is a very specific area, I'm wondering about public noticing. So, and in compliance with county code in regards to public noticing. So, it is the contention of the applicant in their application that they provide more or less. I think the wording is that because it's a text amendment, that notice to specific property owners, presumably within a geographical area, is not required. And yet it is a pretty specific area that has a pretty particular impact to those neighbors. So if this is a question that you would rather respond to during the hearing, but I'm just wondering, how does staff react to the applicant's response to public noticing requirements and their interpretation?
I think that's a great question, Commissioner. And I think we can, take some time to provide some more detail in the public hearing staff report. But I think on its face, as I mentioned in my staff report, I think, currently there are 3 properties that could be eligible. But again, because the distance is based on proximity to a UGB, parcel size, et cetera, there could be some potential reconfigurations that could make properties eligible in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So again, if a UGB were to expand and move, that could potentially have impacts on properties that could be eligible in the future. But I'm happy to, discuss more in regards to noticing with legal and provide, more detail in the hearing staff report.
And the question you raise is one that we had taken some interest in as well. Nicole's point's well taken. She's identified that correctly. The other thing is important to note is that it's proposed as a conditional use. So that's something that at such time it was someone wanted to come in and develop that, there would be notice radius associated with the particular development. I think that the concern about we also shared this concern. And to the extent that this use was an outright use to which there wouldn't be, significant public opportunity to talk about compatibility at a later step, I think that concern is heightened significantly. In this case, because any subsequent approval under the current proposal would require both conditional use and site plan review. That has broad compatibility criteria that would be noticed to immediate neighbors. And when you think about those compatibility criteria, it can matter a lot about how it's developed. So, a particular developer might say, look, I recognize there's a subdivision to one side here. We're going to observe extra setbacks. We're going to put screening vegetation, screening fences, make sure lighting's pointed away. Mm-hmm. So it's hard at the outset to tell what a particular development might be on these properties. And at the same time, one of the things you might reasonably be concerned with is that very issue is, do you want to would you recommend to the board, as part of your recommendation that there be sideboards put in, maybe special neighbor protections, because this isn't an inherently commercial district like many of the other places where this is allowed. Mm-hmm. So, are certain protections beyond what's normally afforded in a commercial district next to a mini storage? Neighbor expectations are probably different. If you were in the MUA 10 zone and someone switched to use to mini storage, I think as our citizen involvement group and responsive to the hearing materials, you're being asked to think about what sort of protections you might want afforded to you in those circumstances in terms of most likely visual impacts. This is something obviously they'll come up at the hearing, but I've worked on a number of mini storage projects, and neighbors have generally found them not a bad compatibility problem. They tend to come with screening fences, relatively low attendance and use, and shielded lighting. And so again, and you'll have to listen to the hearing that comes before you, but I was surprised. I've worked on a number of these, and neighbors have said expansions of ones in non-conforming situations, and neighbors have said, oh no, they're a good neighbor. It's clean, it's fenced, it's quiet. So this and other possible conditions in the MUA 10, conditional uses in the MUA 10 zone include veterinary clinic, churches. So, there certainly are other conditional uses that at least to a neighbor would have, more intense impacts potentially. But again, something to listen for in the hearing process.
Commissioner Hovkamp, if I may, I'm happy to put this on the record. Staff did talk about the notification situation, and because it, as Will noted, and I'll just emphasize this, I mean, principal planners were engaged and as Will articulated, the fact that it's a conditional use permit, which has some very rigorous criteria to demonstrate that if this text amendment were to go in place, and if they applied for an entitlement, a conditional use site plan, they have to demonstrate it's compatible. And so we made the decision, because we have the option in our code. You're not going to get penalized for more notice, even in a legislative process. So we did contemplate, do we send notice to neighboring property owners about this text amendment? And the decision that we made is, because it's a text amendment, but the text amendment is subjecting mini storage under the conditional use criteria, we felt like if this text amendment were to go through and they applied for a conditional use site plan application, that neighbors would be afforded not only the notice and the signage and the opportunity to participate, but they would be able to utilize the conditional use criteria that we've just summarized to articulate in a public process whether or not they felt that mini storage was compatible with the rural environment. Had they come in with a text amendment that was just with a site plan, we would have had a different response, because site plan criteria are really basic: parking, landscaping, lighting. If that was the proposal, which this is not, we would have been compelled to alert the neighboring property owners within a certain distance that this was a text amendment that was considering mini storage. So that was an informed decision that we made. You could raise this again. It might be worthwhile for you to raise this again at the hearing, because I think it's totally appropriate for us to acknowledge how we treated this application. But just for the work session, I wanted to get it on the record.
Thank you, Steph. And can I ask a couple more, please? So thank you for that, all of you. And I'm glad you brought up the conditional use, because that was my next question, just sort of along those lines. So a neighboring property owner that might say, well, down the road, when the actual application is before us, well, the cat, what's the right analogy? The horse is out of the barn. I don't know. It's already provided for with a text amendment. So now it's just a conditional use. So if I'm a neighboring property owner and I'm wondering, well, is this just an incremental way to accomplish something, and that it's provided for? Sure, they have another process and there are criteria that they have to demonstrate and so forth, but it's on the books as a conditional use along with other conditional uses. That ties back into the noticing, and that's going to be the neighboring property owners that might be particularly concerned. Just wondering if we might anticipate that kind of concern from property owners.
I think you would. I mean, generally neighbors are interested in what their neighbors are up to.
Mhm.
Speaking generally, again, hearings officers, when they've evaluated impacts on neighbors, one of the questions they've asked themselves is, what's allowed outright in the zone? What do you expect in the zone? And so, is this thing that's coming in, is it more intense than in terms of visual, noise, odor, light, other impacts? Is it more intense than the residential uses they're allowed outright, or the agricultural uses in terms of those characteristics? So, you're right that right now that this is a closed door. There's no way to get to mini storage on this property. And if this were approved with or without additional sideboards, it would be then something that would be potentially eligible. And if asked, if a hearings officer was asked to evaluate compatibility in a subsequent hearing process, they would be looking to think, is this worse than other things that might show up in the neighborhood? in terms of impacts. So that's, I don't know if that gives you a whole lot, but it's how hearings officers have thought about this. You know, when you think about conditional uses, I think it's really helpful to say it's a maybe thing that goes in the neighborhood. There's some things that we've decided inherently work. You know, single family dwellings, agricultural uses are allowed. Those are presumed to be compatible. This is a conditional use is not presumed to be compatible. You have to ask that question specifically in terms of, you know, anticipated uses in the neighborhood, existing neighborhood uses, and as well as transportation issues, natural resource concerns. So it certainly does, to your point, you know, it incrementally moves this thing towards becoming approvable. Right now, it's not at all.
Mhm.
And at the same time, there is a significant subsequent compatibility step. And I think that that's one of the things that you're being asked at this time is, or you would be asked as part of your deliberative process is this use, as, you know, with the sideboards and conditions that are placed on it, is this a maybe thing in the MUA 10 zone? If it was developed right in accordance with the rules, could it be a suitable neighbor? Or is it have impacts likely inherently that it's not a great idea to put in this type of neighborhood? I think that's one of the questions that would be expressly before you as you were thinking about this matter in deliberations.
Which once again leads into my last question. I mean, you're anticipating them. Great. Thanks, Will. It's perfect. And it has to do with just sort of in compliance with the county code, and the applicants providing this information. So it's their perspective on that. But in the overall purpose statement of the MUA zone, right up front there, it's at 18.32.010 purpose. That's on, no, it's on page 16 of 42 in my packet. But so, and Peter, you alluded to this earlier. I mean, this is information that the applicant's providing, and this is their interpretation that goes to what you were just outlining, which is compatibility overall with the purpose of the MUA zone. And, you know, of course, they're going to interpret that and characterize that it kind of is compatible with the purpose, or potentially could be compatible with the purpose, depending upon the particulars of a development proposal. Is there any interpretation that staff, I mean, so we don't have staff findings. So do we have an opportunity to ask staff or council, is the applicant interpretation of compatibility with the purpose of this zone reasonable? Or is this that opportunity?
I think that's a great question, Commissioner. You'll see in our kind of the incomplete letter section of the website, that was one of the items that we asked the applicant to respond to. So they provided that in their
Right.
supplemental materials. You know, I would say that purpose statements are aspirational. So, you know, I think that's part of, you know, what we're looking to the Planning Commission for input on. You know, in the past, we've handled text amendments applicant initiated text amendments a little bit differently. So Will and I actually talked about this to get to your point of, you know, not having staff findings to assess this. But again, because the applicant is the party bearing the burden of proof, they need to, you know, provide findings demonstrating this. I think it's, again, like the Planning Commission's role to, you know, assist us in that evaluation. But if there's specific criteria that you want, you know, staff input on, or certain sections where you'd like to understand any case law or any, you know, history that Will has provided, you know, this evening along those lines, we're happy to do that. But
Yeah, I think you're asking a great question. You know, certainly if you were to ask, you know, if this proposal was instead to put a Costco in this location,
Right.
I think it would be pretty obvious that that's not consistent with, you know, the other uses that are allowed in the zone. I think this one, you know, for your consideration respectfully, is one that falls in a gray area. You know, if you look at the other uses that are allowed in there, you know, it's not certainly and obviously aligned with those other uses in terms of it being a commercial use that, you know, that is drawing people, you know, to a central location. You know, there are some similar things like that, you know, in there. And at the same time, you know, it's also a lower impact use than, you know, certainly a Costco or some other sort of more intense industrial use. So I think that's very much before you. And maybe the core of the question that's asked is, you know, is this something that if appropriately sideboarded could be a good neighbor in this area and reasonably compatible with what people's expectations of what should be in the neighborhood would be. I mean, if you think about zoning, that's what the purpose of it is to give people some certainty that when they buy a property, they're not going to find a hog rendering plant next to them.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Cyrus?
Yeah, my question is a little bit of a side question. Maybe it may not be relevant to this particular process, but I was looking at the criteria for establishing these units. And one of the things that actually popped out to me, and I was wondering whether the fire agencies had reviewed the part where it says it shall be limited to one access. To me, I mean, from a different hat, that seems like an actual fairly dangerous situation to only allow one access to a property that could have huge fire exposure.
So that's specifically in the conditional use criteria. It's item I. Just want to make sure I'm looking at the same thing. There shall be only one access from each adjacent.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's a good question. We could, if the planning commission is interested, we did send this to Ben Fire, but didn't receive a response. But happy to reach out to them again to see if they had any concerns.
Just a thought, you might pose that question and maybe it's appropriate somewhere in the process to maybe change that restriction, because to me, it sounds like a bit of a problem, or could be pretty problematic to fight any kind of a fire in a facility like that when you can only have one access.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable concern. We've heard some testimony over the past week from our community partners out at the landfill, and the number of lithium batteries that burst into flame out there with great regularity. And people will be storing these things within increasing frequency, e-bikes, other things. I think the risk of fires associated with residential personal property is just going up over time. One of the things for your consideration, and what may be interesting, is that let's say that you were interested in making some sort of change associated with that. Then you've got a choice, which is, would you be advocating to the board that all mini storages in the future be subject to, having multiple accesses, or having, a number of access points that are deemed appropriate by the responding fire district, for example? Or would you, the other thing you could do as an example is say that in the MUA 10 zone, when these are allowed, that that the responding fire district shall determine the appropriate number of access points, and this overrides the general language in mini storage facility. So it's a good example of, you may be inclined to think generally about mini storages. And one of the things that I think that it would be helpful, and that the applicant present to, is to talk about in other jurisdictions when mini storages are allowed either in or adjacent to residential zones. How do other jurisdictions think about those? What sort of sideboards or protections are put on those? My quick review of those, I mostly found ones that were in light industrial districts. And I didn't find, at least in my quick search of other jurisdictions, examples of ones that were in residential districts and how kind of rural counties thought about them. So it may be helpful for you to ask the applicant specifically about how other jurisdictions deal with these when they, they're likely to have residential neighbors. And also, circling back to your point, to think broadly about, is this something that, our mini storage code was last updated in 2008. And I don't know specifically what was changed at that point. But it certainly, I know there've been concerns over time. For example, I think there have been concerns about access. Generally traffic lanes in commercial facilities have to be two-way. And a lot of these mini storages have one-way aisles, to limit the amount of asphalt they need to put down between the units. I know that responding fire districts have been concerned about being able to have access aisles that they can effectively, I guess there's a limited distance that you can fight from your vehicle, from the fire vehicle. And so they had concerns. I worked on one of these, the one that's up in Terrebonne. That's kind of where the cell tower is there over on the side where this kind of in front of the school. And there were definitely some concerns about the ability to fight fires and making sure lanes were placed appropriately and with enough frequency that they could get at the various units. So definitely interesting questions.
And I guess that was kind of my thought. I mean, this is kind of a side topic because this is language already in place, but it may be something we'd want to visit separately than this text amendment, because I potentially see some problems with that maybe the fire agencies might want to weigh in, and since it came to our attention, it might be something to take a look at like I say, a side amendment.
Yeah, and you're certainly not precluded from recommending to the board changes generally to mini storage. That's the interesting thing about text amendments is that because it's applicant initiated, and to Peter's point earlier about, with the contrast with staff initiated text amendments, certainly there's a lot of back and forth between staff and the planning commission as we try to get an amendment that's suitable to what, responsive to what you'd like to see from that as we move towards the board. In this case, the applicant will propose something. You can advocate for things, to allow it, to disallow it, to change, significant aspects of what the sideboards are. And in the end, they may or may not take that up as part of their proposal before the board. And so, we'll be before the board saying the planning commission thought this, the applicant has agreed to all of that, or the applicant, has some significant disagreements for reasons. Board, here we go.
Yeah,
Yes.
Just in response to Commissioner Cyrus and the other comments that have been made to date, I think this has been a really productive work session. It gets you thinking about ultimately, you need to have the hearing. You need to listen to obviously the testimony from the applicant, any comments that we get from the Rural Fire Protection District or Ben Fire, the general public. But what I'm struck by is you get to start thinking about how you want to potentially handle the open record period. You get to determine that timeline, and you may find, based on a multitude of comments and remarks, that during that open record period, you may want some additional information, maybe from staff or also a response from the applicant or both. And, as it pertains to, access and fire and life safety. So I don't think we're going to be able to obviously kind of solve or, put our arms around all of those issues tonight, but the legislative process, as with quasi judicial, but the legislative process gives you as much time as you would like. So as the hearing unfolds, and as you begin thinking about, you have the opportunity to continue the hearing for oral written testimony. But when you get to the part of maybe thinking about the open record period, you may want to have it for a few weeks to allow staff and particularly the applicant to respond to some of these questions and any others that come between now and the hearing. So I think it's been a while since we've had an applicant initiated amendment like this. So this is really important. And the structure of the process I think will give the Planning Commission ample time to communicate kind of the additional perspectives, insight, information that you want, so that when it's time for deliberation, you'll be well prepared.
Yes.
So originally I was just really curious about how specific this was to these properties. And in my mind went, wow, this is really interesting. They're going to put mini storage here because, highest and best use. These are residential lots, it was speculative purchasing to purchase this land for the UBG expansion. I'm like, this is really, why would they put these mini storage here? It seems, I was just kind of, confused about that. And then it was very interesting when I found out that mini storage also is like RV storage, and it doesn't, so not a ton of infrastructure will actually go into this project in order for them to make money. And then I was like, and this is all kind of stream of consciousness coming out of my mouth right now. So I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. They don't really have to put that much investment into this. And and RV storage is highly lucrative. It's little cash cows. And then they can just hold this land until the UGG. This is really creative. And yeah, I think it's a very creative solution for them to recoup holding costs. And then I'm wondering, is there a need? Would it benefit? Would it benefit this developer only, or would it benefit our community to have storage? And if it benefits our community to have storage, do we need it? Well, then great. But if it's just a way to, recoup some holding costs, then I'm a little more conflicted about this. So these are just my thoughts as I'm learning through staff and colleague comments. This is kind of what my mind's going through. And it's making it more oh, now I kind of get it. And why it's not Highway 97. So I was like, well, why is it only Highway 20? Why shouldn't it be 97? Aren't there some other, I started kind of poking around Dial, like what other properties? And so now it kind of makes more sense why and I've never experienced this applicant initiated process before. So this is new to me. So that's, I'm like, oh, this is very interesting and creative. So those are just my thoughts to kind of summarize what I'm hearing tonight. And I'm really excited to hear what the applicant has to say, because I think it will clarify some of my thoughts. This is clearly a developer who's doing this, who's developed other residential lands. And so one of my concerns is, if they do put up the mini storage, will it look really temporary? Will it look low quality? Will it be like, we'll say 2 units perhaps, and then a bunch of, will it look like a placeholder and not like a quality mini storage facility?
Sure.
Yes.
I can just provide a little bit of background because I know these properties. There is a mini storage down the street, maybe a mile away, maybe less than 2 miles away, on the other side of 27th. This is between Highway 20, 27th, and Bear Creek Road. And then the 2 properties are on the north side of Highway 20. The one larger property is on the south side of Highway 20. Next to the larger property on the south side of Highway 20 is a parcel that is going to be developed for affordable housing, if I remember correctly. So there will be future residences right next door. And then down 27th is the Stevens Road tract, which we visited last summer. So there is a lot of residential development going on in the area that could possibly be served by, a mini storage business. But just to give you some insight, because I know the area and I know the properties.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
To address Commissioner Kelly's comments, I mean, it's not uncommon for a developer to sideboards on an application such that it only fits maybe 1 or 2 properties in the entire area in order to avoid opposition or broad opposition from around. It's essentially creating a one-off, a very specific approval for a particular piece of property by putting sideboards on it such that nothing else qualifies. Which, I mean, my personal opinion, I'd rather address a broader issue rather than one particular piece of property, but that's what's been applied for in order to, I'm sure, limit opponents.
Any other comments? Any other questions? All righty, Nicole.
Right. Excellent discussion, commissioners. I think you raised a lot of great points, great questions. I know, that at least one member of the applicant team has been listening in, but we'll coordinate with them and share all the questions and items of interest from this evening so that they can be prepared for your hearing on June 13th. Yeah, that's all I have on that. Thank you.
Will?
I was in response to Commissioner Cyrus's remarks. I just wanted to note that the mini storage facility, it looks like it appears first in our code in 1991. And there've only been 2 minor tweaks since then. One upping the size of a storage unit from 500 to 1,000 feet to be eligible. And then there was another minor change. Oh, and I've gone and lost it, but they're both relatively minor tweaks. So the question of, has the mini storage been thought about carefully? The sideboards that are on mini storage have been thought about carefully, not since 1991. So, changes in kind of fire concerns, things like that, I think are, may well be reasonably before you at this point. That's all I had.
Peter?
Are we under planning commission and staff comments?
Yep.
I do have a few, since I've been away for 2 of your last meetings. So wanted to personally welcome Commissioner Stovkamp to the Planning Commission. I'm looking at you, Mark, remotely, but welcome. It's great to have you on the Planning Commission, and we're looking at a full Planning Commission, the first one that I've seen, and it feels like a month and a half. So just wanted to welcome you and look forward to working with you over your term.
Thank you.
Also wanted to acknowledge, if it wasn't previously, that Commissioner Altman was reappointed to a second term. So congratulations. Again, it's I just think incredibly important when you have commissioners that have institutional knowledge and experience that resonates with a commission like ours with some newer members, and it's just an extraordinary blend. So wanted to congratulate you on that appointment. In terms of some housekeeping, I talked to Commissioner Altman about this just before the meeting started. I think all of you are aware there was an email I sent regarding policy GA 25. It's the eventually you will all be assigned a county email. I gather there hasn't been a response yet, but I'm coordinating with administration on that. So if you haven't already, please review the video, and there's a form that you fill out, an attestation form. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to Stephanie or myself. But it's for reasons that were described. I think it's really healthy just to have an email. It's one that you can rely upon and allows us to kind of manage the record. So thank you for bearing through that. And we'll know more over the next several months, and we can share those emails with all of you. I want to talk about our work plan, the Community Development Department's work plan. The Board of County Commissioners held their hearing on the 15th of May. They left the written record open until the 29th, basically a week from, well, actually not a week, it's this Wednesday at 4:00. And then deliberations are expected on June 12th. So your comments, your observations, the kind of projects you would like to take on besides just those that identified in those three tables will be communicated to the board. And I have every expectation that they will support that and acknowledge or adopt the work plan in the middle of June. Yesterday, we had our presentation with the Budget Committee and the Board of County Commissioners. No real surprises. I was honest about some of the challenges that we've experienced budgetarily this fiscal year. I think all of you know the Community Development Department, due to disappointingly low development activity and permit volumes that really stemmed all the way back from winter of 2022. We were at a point where it was a tough decision that I had to make to initiate layoffs. And so that was communicated and well understood. To maintain our service levels in the community, we are raising our fees anywhere between 14 to 18%. That's pretty significant in years past, but that's addressing cost of living, COLAs based on the Consumer Price Index, merit increases, healthcare costs. So though that was in our recommended budget there, I think that was acknowledged certainly by the Budget Committee. I didn't gather there was much pushback, but it is a significant increase that we acknowledge to our customers, and we've done I think a reasonably good job of coordinating with Central Oregon Builders Association, realtors, and others about where we are and what we need to maintain certain service levels. So we have a proposed budget of just short of $11 million and 50 employees. So in June, the Board of County Commissioners will act on the Budget Committee's recommendations, and I'm not expecting, knock on wood, any significant changes to the Community Development Department. I have two more items. Wanted to make sure you were aware of the wildfire mapping effort that the Oregon Department of Forestry is rolling out. Just a reminder that on June 3rd in Redmond from 7 to 9, I think the Department of Forestry, Oregon State University, I think the State Fire Marshal will be there. This is at the fairgrounds. I don't think I mentioned that. Redmond Fairgrounds, 7 to 9. Are going to talk about the draft map. It's still in an iterative process. I was talking to Kyle Collins, our associate planner, Will has tasked to kind of monitor this process. What we're understanding is the draft's going to be rolled out likely this fall for public input, and with the expectation that at some point in 24-25 that map will get adopted. I think, as you know, As a recap, the map identifies low, medium, and high risk areas. If you're in a high risk area and within the wildland urban interface, residential construction has to be fire hardened, and properties are subject to defensible space. And defensible space. What time was the?
Is it PM or AM?
It's 7 and the meeting in Redmond from 7 to 9 in the evening at the Redmond Fairgrounds. Yeah. When that map is acknowledged at the state level, Will's team will be coming forward with an amendment to our comprehensive plan to recognize that. So that's not immediate, but I certainly think that's something that Will's team will undertake next fiscal year. The last thing that I wanted to talk about, and there's been a little bit of press on this topic, but I'm coordinating a $20 million grant to the Environmental Protection Agency. It's a community change grant in partnership with Neighbor Impact, Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council, the Department of Environmental Quality, and a number of departments, including the Planning Division, and Will and Nicole specifically, County Forestry, Solid Waste. The resources would be targeted to a federally recognized area where it's disadvantaged. It's an area around La Pine, including portions of the city of La Pine. Resources could go towards helping eligible property owners upgrade their septic systems to nitrogen reducing systems, helping families with rehabilitation, weatherization, and air filtration, dealing with air quality. There's resources that could go towards fuel reduction in coordination with the Heart of Oregon, and money that could potentially be spent on, this is a new term that I have learned now, called air curtain burners. Think of them as the size of a big dumpster with a cap on it that incinerate biomass at a cleaner level, and it creates, new term for me, biochar. Looking at Nathan, maybe you know about. Anyway, it's a version of compost that you can apply on the land. So we have a proposal for one of those at the Southwest Transfer and Recycling Center, which just happens to be 2 miles away from this eligible area, or one of the 2 census tracts that are eligible, and another one that would be mobile. That could be, we're saying, as a demonstration project. For this grant, it would be deployed on county-owned properties in this area to deal with defensible space. Also, resources would go towards next month in one of the 2 meetings. Hopefully I'll be able to share with you what we actually submitted. The precise numbers are still in flux, but we're also proposing to help eligible property owners repair or deepen their domestic wells, because we know that in certain areas the water table is dropping. So it's unprecedented. It is the most complicated grant application that I have ever seen. It's an open grant cycle. It was open in November of 2023. It closes in November of 2024. There's $2 billion available for eligible entities, of which we are clearly one of them. To my knowledge, no, there has not been an announcement yet of an award of entities that have been awarded, which I think is to our favor, because we'll get in kind of that first surge, recognizing that we're going to be going up against major metropolitan areas that have environmental justice and disadvantaged communities that have been impacted on matters pertaining to air and water quality, as well as brownfield implications. So it's an extremely exciting project. You have to demonstrate that the work can be done, that you have the capacity to do the work, and it has to be finished within 3 years. So credit goes to Will and Nicole and others who are assisting writing this grant, preparing a detailed budget, but it includes Stephanie Marshall, who's been working on a partnership agreement with Neighbor Impact. So fingers crossed. It's an extraordinarily exciting grant opportunity for a portion of Southern Deschutes County. If we are awarded the grant, I think obviously it ties into Newberry country. It could be there will be a module in Newberry Country to promote this grant opportunity, get resources out into the community. So this isn't addressed in the grant, but as I'm looking at all of you, I see a role for the Planning Commission to figure out how we talk about these opportunities, not only from a policy document, but with real resources, with partners that have demonstrable experience in this part of the county. So more to come, but we'll utilize your good vibes to think about this opportunity. And like I said, next month I'll be able to kind of tell you precisely what those numbers are. How many ATTs are we thinking about? How many acres do we think we can treat for defensible space? But it's the upper limit of the grant application is 20 million. So we're going to 20 million. And I'm with each passing day, I'm more and more confident that we're gonna give them an application that is persuasive and very creditable. So that's the last item, and I'll just say it's great to be back with you and look forward to collaborating with you heading into the summer and the fall. So thank you.
Commissioner Cyrus?
Well, I'd like to welcome Peter back and appreciate nice job at holding the meeting. And I don't have anything else.
Commissioner Altman?
Good meeting, really, really good conversation, I thought, and congratulations to Stephanie Marshall on her promotion.
Vice Chair?
Yeah, same. Great meeting. Congratulations to Stephanie Marshall, and that's all I've got.
Commissioner Kelly?
Yeah, ditto. Thanks everyone for the meeting. Thank you, Nicole, for the presentation, and yeah, thank you, Will and Stephanie and Peter.
Commissioner Hovkamp?
No comments. Thanks.
Alrighty. And Commissioner Stottkamp?
Yeah, thanks for a great meeting. I appreciate Nicole pointing out that there's two different text amendments. I was kind of confused. I saw two of the mini storage, and I didn't catch that it was 97 and 20. So I think we got some fun public hearings ahead. So looking forward to it.
Yes.
Sorry, I wanted to give just a couple comments, if that's okay. I didn't know if you had any updates too, but I wanted to provide an update on our comprehensive plan update project, if the Planning Commission is interested. So the board held 4 public hearings between April and May. We had a mixture of morning, afternoon, and evening hearings. We also went a little bit on tour, went to Sun River and went to Sisters. Wanted to note that the record is still open until May 30th. So they're still collecting some written feedback. Right now we have 335 total public comments in the record. So quite a few since this left the Planning Commission, if you're interested in reviewing some of those new comments. And we've also received some additional agency comments from ODF&W, DLCD, Bend Parks and Rec, Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, and the City of Bend. So we're planning to return to the board for kind of a pre-deliberations meeting, similar to what we did with the Planning Commission on June 10th, and we'll keep you updated from there. And then 2 other just plugs. We're participating in Lapine's comprehensive plan update as well. And their website, lapine2045.com, I believe, is up. They have a survey open right now. So if you know anyone who might be interested, they could visit that website and take kind of a brief like map-based survey that they have. And then also wanted to note that the City of Sisters released, kind of a press release that they're accepting applications for their UGB steering committee. So they'll be pursuing a UGB expansion process. So the applications for that are due by tomorrow at 5 p.m. if you know anyone who might be interested.
And Nicole, just to confirm, maybe my dates are wrong, but the open record period for the comprehensive plan, is it May 30th or May 29th?
May 30th.
Okay.
RVs is May 30th.
Okay, good. Just so I just wanted you to reaffirm. So May 30th, which is Thursday, a week from today at 4 p.m. Great. Thank you for that clarification.
So I'll sum up comments. I was a little surprised we had so much to discuss about mini storage text amendment. I'm actually looking forward to working through this and seeing if we have additional input from the public or agencies. And Tracy, thank you as always for doing everything you do and getting down the new software that we're using. And with that said, thank you, gentle people.
Mhm.
And I believe our next planning commission meeting will then be Thursday, June 13th. All righty. At 6:50, I will close the meeting.
Perfect. I heard about you being a
we had Tanya. It was so